In a faraway island, deep inside a wild jungle, a small group of soldiers refused to believe the war was over. For years they lived alone, hungry, tired, but loyal. They followed their captain's orders, waiting for the day their country would call them home. The world changed, but they did not know. They fought shadows, they endured storms, and they held on to faith when all hope was gone. This is the story of courage, loyalty, and the human heart that would not break, the story of the soldiers who never surrendered. The jungle was silent except for the soft hum of insects and the whisper of leaves in the wind. The air was heavy and wet, and the smell of earth filled the soldiers' noses. Captain Hiroshi looked around carefully, his eyes sharp and alert. He held his rifle close, even though his hands were tired and dirty. It had been many years since the war began, and still he and his men refused to give up. There were 6 of them left now. Once there had been 20. Time, sickness, and hunger had taken the others. But these 6 believed they were still soldiers of their emperor. They believed Japan was still fighting. They had no radio, no letters, no news from home. Only their mission remained, to hold the island and never surrender. Hiroshi was a quiet man. He spoke few words, but when he did, the others listened. He had been a teacher before the war. Now his students were soldiers, and his lessons were about survival. Every morning he checked their small camp hidden deep in the jungle. Every night he made sure no firelight showed, so the enemy would not find them. The youngest of the group, Kenji, was only 19. He had joined the army near the end of the war. He still dreamed of home, of his mother's rice fields and his younger sister who used to laugh at everything. But here laughter was rare. The jungle was not a place for smiles. It was a place of heat, rain, and fear. Each day they hunted small animals and gathered fruit. They cleaned their old rifles and checked their few bullets. They spoke quietly about the emperor and about honor. They believed that someday the Japanese army would come for them. Until then, they would stay hidden and ready. One afternoon, while searching for food, Kenji saw something strange near the river. A piece of metal lay half buried in the mud. It was shiny and round with strange writing on it. He called the others. Sergeant Tanaka came running, his boots splashing through the water. He picked up the object and turned it over in his hands. "It is from the enemy," he said softly. The men looked at each other. None of them could read the English letters on it. They decided to take it back to camp. That night, as rain fell on the leaves, they sat close together under a small shelter made from bamboo and canvas. The metal object lay between them. Hiroshi stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "It does not matter what this says. The war is not over until we are told by our superiors. We must stay strong." The men nodded. Even though their clothes were torn and their shoes were falling apart, they still saluted their captain. Their discipline was all they had left. They believed that one day a ship would appear on the horizon and their countrymen would come to relieve them. The days passed slowly. Sometimes they heard strange noises far away, explosions or engines, but they never went to see. The jungle was full of dangers, snakes, wild boars, and the unknown enemy. They trusted no one outside their small group. To them, the island was still a battlefield. One morning, while the mist still hung in the trees, they saw smoke in the distance. Hiroshi ordered everyone to stay low. They crawled through the thick bushes until they could see. A group of men were building something near the shore. They wore bright shirts and carried strange tools, not weapons. Kenji frowned. "They do not look like soldiers," he whispered. "They are probably spies," said Tanaka. Hiroshi watched quietly. The men by the shore laughed and worked together. They did not seem afraid. Hiroshi's heart felt confused. Could it be that the war was over? No, he thought. It could be a trick. The enemy was clever. They wanted the last Japanese soldiers to surrender so they could claim victory. That night, the group argued. Tanaka wanted to attack the strangers. Kenji begged to wait. He said they should watch longer. Finally, Hiroshi made his decision. "We do nothing," he said. "We wait. The truth will show itself. Until then, we are soldiers." The next few weeks were quiet. The strangers came and went, but the soldiers stayed hidden. Food became harder to find. The rainy season brought floods, and their shelter leaked. Still, they endured. Hiroshi reminded them that their duty was to serve, not to question. Sometimes, when the moon was bright, Kenji dreamed of home. He dreamed of walking through his village, hearing children laugh, smelling fresh rice cooking. But every morning, he woke up in the same wet jungle with the same tired faces around him. One night, a storm hit the island. Trees cracked and fell. Their camp was destroyed. They ran through the rain shouting each other's names. When the storm ended, 2 men were missing. They searched for hours but only found one, Private Sato, lying under a fallen branch. He was gone. The other man was never found. The next day, Hiroshi gathered the remaining soldiers. His face was pale, but his voice was firm. "We will not break," he said. "We will rebuild. The Emperor watches over us." The men bowed their heads. Even though their hearts were heavy, they believed him. Their small world was shrinking, but their faith was unbroken. As weeks turned into months, the jungle grew thicker. Their clothes turned to rags. Their skin was thin, their eyes hollow. Yet every morning Hiroshi made them stand in a line, raise their rifles, and salute the rising sun. It was their only connection to the world they once knew. One day Kenji heard music coming from the beach. It was soft and strange, not like any song he had heard before. He followed the sound carefully, hiding behind trees. When he reached the edge of the forest, he saw a group of people dancing near a fire. They were not soldiers. They looked happy and free. He wanted to run out and ask them what year it was. But fear held him back. He turned and ran back to camp. When he told Hiroshi, the captain only said, "It is a trick. They want us to think the war is over. But we will not be fooled." That night, Kenji could not sleep. He stared at the stars and wondered if his country still existed. He wondered if anyone even remembered them. The jungle was endless, and the silence was deep. But somewhere inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, the war had ended long ago. The morning after the storm, the jungle looked new and broken at the same time. Branches lay across the path. Vines hung low like wet ropes. The soldiers moved slowly, stepping around puddles and mud. Captain Hiroshi led the way with careful eyes. He checked the tracks, listened to the birds, and raised his hand when he heard something strange. But it was only a monkey leaping from a tree. The island was alive, and it did not care about them. They rebuilt their shelter with bamboo and leaves. Kenji tied knots and tried to make the roof tight so the rain would not come in again. Sergeant Tanaka said little. He worked hard with a set jaw and a steady grip. The others watched him and copied his movements. They were fewer now, and each man felt the gap where a friend used to stand. At night, when the insects sang loud, Kenji thought of the music he had heard by the beach. He wanted to believe it was real joy. He wanted to believe the people there were safe and free. He wanted to believe the war had ended and they had simply not heard. But Hiroshi's words stayed in his mind like a wall. Do not be fooled. Hold your duty. Wait for orders. Days turned into a gray string of hunger and quiet work. The men set traps for small animals. They fished with hooks made from bent wire. They found a patch of wild taro and guarded it like treasure. Now and then, Kenji found an empty can near the shore, or a broken glass bottle with smooth edges. He kept these small things and stared at them when he could not sleep. They felt like messages from another world. One afternoon, as the sun was falling and the air grew cool, they heard a plane. It was faint at first, like a bee. Then it grew louder and louder until the leaves shook. The soldiers ran to a hiding place and lay flat on the ground. The plane was silver and fast. It flew over the island and flashed in the light. A moment later, something fluttered down from it, white and light like leaves in winter. Kenji crawled forward and reached one of the falling bundles. It was a paper leaflet. More leaflets lay all over the ground. He picked one up with shaking hands. On one side, he saw a picture of a man smiling and waving. On the other side, there were words in Japanese. He stared at them, his eyes wide. He called for Hiroshi. The captain took the leaflet and read it slowly. His face did not move at first. Then his mouth tightened. Kenji waited. Tanaka waited. The others gathered close. It says the war ended many years ago, Hiroshi said at last. His voice was low and calm. It says Japan surrendered. It says we should come out and return home. Kenji's heart jumped. He grabbed another leaflet and tried to read it himself. He was not as good as Hiroshi, but he knew the characters for peace, for home, for mother. He saw them there on the page. Peace, home, mother. Tears burned behind his eyes. Tanaka shook his head. "It is a trap," he said. "They copy our language. They want us to come out so they can arrest us. This is the enemy's trick." Hiroshi looked at the paper again. The wind moved the corners. The jungle was quiet, as if it were listening, too. At last he folded the leaflet and tucked it into his shirt. "We cannot trust this," he said. "We have seen tricks before. We stay on guard." Kenji's hope fell like a stone in water. He knew the captain had saved them many times by being careful. He respected him. He had promised to follow him. But a soft voice inside whispered that this time was different. The paper felt warm in his hand. The characters felt true. That night, Kenji lay awake and watched the dark shapes of the leaves sway above him. He thought of his mother's hands and his sister's laugh. He thought of trains and streets and lamps after sunset. He thought of rice cooking and the sound of rain on a tiled roof. The jungle song was not home. It never would be. In the morning, Hiroshi called the men together. He held the leaflet and another item in his hands. The new item was a small radio part found near the shore, wrapped in oiled cloth and sealed in a tin. "The enemy leaves these things to confuse us," he said. "We ignore them. We will move deeper into the interior. We will avoid the beach. We will survive as we have survived." They packed their few belongings and began to move. The path was steep. The ground was soft and gave under their feet. They climbed higher where the trees were close and the air was cooler. Birds watched them with bright eyes. A lizard ran across a rock and vanished. Around noon, they reached a ridge that looked down across the island. From there, they could see the coastline like a thin line of silver. They could also see something strange, a tall pole near the beach with a cloth at the top. The cloth moved in the wind. Kenji narrowed his eyes. The cloth had a red circle in the middle. His breath stopped. He grabbed Tanaka's sleeve. "Look," he whispered. "Our flag." Tanaka stared. Hiroshi stared. No one spoke. The flag rose and fell with the wind. It was old and its edges were torn, but the red sun was clear in the center. "An enemy trick," Tanaka said again, but his voice sounded less sure. Hiroshi's face was calm, but his hands were tight on his rifle. He watched for a long time. Then he turned away. "We keep moving," he said. "We cannot risk it." They left the ridge and went back into the trees. Kenji's chest felt heavy. He wanted to speak, but he had no words the captain would accept. He walked with his head down, listening to his breath and the beat of his heart. 2 days later, while gathering water at a stream, Kenji found another sign. It was a small wooden box tied to a rock with twine. On top, a note was tucked under the string. It was written in Japanese, careful and neat. He read it slowly. It said, "To the soldiers who remain, your war is over. Your families wait. Come to the beach at sunset. No harm. Food, medicine, return." Kenji took the box to camp. Hiroshi opened it. Inside were bandages, a tin of biscuits, and a small folded photograph. The photograph showed a group of old men and women, holding a banner with Japanese words. A smaller sign near the front read, "We believe you are alive." Tanaka stared at the picture with hard eyes. "They copy faces too," he said. "Do not trust it." Hiroshi set the items down and looked at the men. "This could be a way to catch us," he said. "We must test them without exposing ourselves." That evening, Hiroshi sent Kenji and another soldier named Mori to watch the beach from a hidden place. Kenji's stomach turned with fear and hope as they crept through the brush. They lay quiet behind a fallen log and waited. The sun slid down and painted the sky with soft gold. The waves moved back and forth like breathing. At last, people appeared. They came in small boats and pulled them onto the sand. They did not carry guns. They carried baskets and blankets. A man placed a small lantern on a rock and lit it. A woman spread a cloth on the ground and set food on top. There were bottles of water, cups, and bowls. No one shouted. No one searched the trees. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, ran back and forth near the water and laughed when a wave chased his feet. Kenji felt a pain in his chest that was not fear. It was longing so strong it hurt. He looked at Mori. Mori's mouth was open. His eyes were wet. Then the older man near the lantern raised his hands and called out in Japanese. His voice carried across the water and the sand. He said, "Brothers, if you are there, we are here for you. We will not force you. We will come again tomorrow and the next day and the next. We know your names. We know your captain. We know you kept your vow. Please come home." He spoke the names slowly, carefully, one by one. Kenji felt his heart stop when he heard his own name. He squeezed the log. He listened as the man spoke the name of Captain Hiroshi, the name of Sergeant Tanaka, and the names of the others. The boy by the water picked up a stick and drew a sun in the wet sand. Kenji and Mori lay still until the visitors left. The lantern burned down and the sky turned dark. Only starlight and the soft foam of the waves remained. They crawled backward and then ran through the trees. Back at camp, Kenji told everything, his words fast and low. He told about the food and the boy and the man who said their names. He saw hope rise in the eyes of the others like a small flame. Even Tanaka was silent. Hiroshi stood very still. The jungle was so quiet that Kenji could hear a leaf fall. At last, Hiroshi spoke. "Names can be learned," he said. "But there is something new here. If it is a trap, it is patient. If it is not, then the world has changed without us." He looked at the photograph again. He looked at the biscuits and the bandages. Then he looked at Kenji. "Tomorrow, we will send a sign. A small one." He took the leaflet from his shirt and spread it flat. On the back, he wrote a short message in simple words. It said, "We are alive. We cannot trust. Leave a newspaper with date. Leave it and go. We will take it if safe." In the morning, Kenji and Mori carried the note back to the stream and tied it where the box had been. Then they went to the ridge and watched the shore. At sunset, the boats came again. The same man lit the lantern. He walked to the rock and found the note. He read it and nodded. He raised his hand and showed a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it on the rock, stepped back, and waited without moving. After a time, he and the others left. Hours later, when the beach was empty and the moon was high, Hiroshi led them down the slope. They moved like shadows. They reached the rock and took the bundle. Kenji's hands shook as he untied the string. Inside was a newspaper, dry and clean. The date was clear and modern. The headline spoke of things he did not know, names he had never heard. But there, in the corner, was a small story about a parade in Tokyo, with children waving flags in peace. The morning sun rose slowly, sending soft gold light through the thick trees. The jungle was quiet except for the songs of birds waking. The soldiers stood together near their small camp. Their clothes were torn, their faces thin, and their rifles old. But something inside them felt different. The newspaper lay on a rock in the middle of the camp, and each man looked at it as if it were a window to another world. Captain Hiroshi stood tall, even though his shoulders were tired. He looked at his men one by one, Tanaka, Mori, Kenji, and the others who had survived. Their eyes waited for his command. The captain took a slow breath. "Today," he said, "we will go to the beach. But we go as soldiers. We do not surrender. We go to listen and see. If this is truth, then we will know. If it is a trap, we will fight." Tanaka nodded. His face was hard, but his hands trembled slightly. Kenji felt his heart beating fast. He could hardly believe the moment had come. For so many years, they had hidden from the world. Now, at last, they were going to see it again. They prepared as best they could. They cleaned their rifles and checked their few bullets. They tied their boots with vines and patched their uniforms with pieces of cloth. Kenji tied a piece of rope around his waist to hold his torn pants up. When he looked at his reflection in a small puddle, he hardly recognized himself. His hair was long, his face was thin, and his eyes were deep and dark. But under that, he saw something new. Hope. By noon, the jungle air was hot and heavy. They began to move down the slope, walking in a single line. Hiroshi led, Tanaka walked behind him, and Kenji followed with his heart thumping. The path was narrow and steep, and the sound of the sea grew louder with each step. When they reached the edge of the forest, they could see the sand through the leaves. The blue water shone under the sun. It was the first open sky they had seen in months. Near the shore, a small group of people waited. The same man from before stood near a lantern. Beside him were two women, the young boy, and another man holding a white flag. They were not soldiers. They did not have weapons. A table with food and water stood beside them. Hiroshi raised his hand and his men stopped. They crouched behind the trees, watching. The man by the lantern looked toward the forest and called out in Japanese. "Captain Hiroshi, Sergeant Tanaka, Private Kenji, and others," he said. "If you are there, we come in peace. The war has ended. Japan has been at peace for many years. We are here to take you home." The soldiers stayed silent. The man continued, his voice steady and kind. "I am Major Yamamoto from the Japanese Army. The government sent us to find you. We have proof, newspapers, letters, photos from your families. You have served with honor. You are not forgotten." Hiroshi's face did not move. He watched every gesture, every sound. Then he spoke softly to his men. "We will walk out. Keep your rifles ready, but do not fire unless I say. We go with respect." They stepped out from the trees one by one. The people near the shore turned and stared. Some gasped softly. The soldiers looked like ghosts from another time. Their uniforms faded, their skin dark from the sun, their eyes sharp and uncertain. The boy stepped closer, but his mother pulled him gently back. Hiroshi stopped a few meters away. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was calm but hard. "How do I know you speak the truth?" The man, Major Yamamoto, reached into his bag slowly and brought out a small bundle. He placed it on the ground and stepped back. "Here," he said. "These are letters from your families. These are newspapers with dates. These are photos from Tokyo, from your towns. Take them." Tanaka moved first. He stepped forward with his rifle in one hand and picked up the bundle. He opened it and stared. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He held up one of the photos. It showed an old woman smiling, holding a picture of a young soldier in uniform. "My mother," he whispered. His knees gave way and he fell to the sand. He pressed the photo to his chest and began to cry for the first time in years. Kenji came closer and took one of the letters. It was written in soft, careful handwriting. He read the first line and felt the world stop. It was from his sister. She wrote about their village, about the rice fields, about their mother's cooking. She said they prayed for him every day. She said they believed he was alive. Tears rolled down his face, and his hands shook so much he could barely hold the paper. Hiroshi stood still, staring at the others. His heart wanted to believe, but his mind was trained to doubt. "How can I know this is not a trick?" he asked. Major Yamamoto looked at him. "Captain, the war has been over for nearly 30 years, he said. "The Emperor himself sent word after the surrender. Japan is free and the world has changed." The Emperor's message was recorded. He told all soldiers to lay down their arms and return home. "I have a copy of that message with me. Would you like to hear it?" He opened a small recorder and pressed a button. A voice came through, soft, old, but clear. It spoke in Japanese, calm and full of sorrow. It was the Emperor's voice. Even through the crackle of the machine, Hiroshi knew it. He had grown up hearing that voice on the radio. Now it said words that broke the silence inside him. "Endure the unbearable. Accept the end of war. Work for peace." Hiroshi's rifle slipped from his hand and fell to the sand. The sound echoed in the quiet air. He stood frozen, his eyes wet. For a long time, no one spoke. The waves moved in and out like a slow breath. At last, Hiroshi said, "All this time, all these years, we fought ghosts." His voice trembled. He turned to his men. "We did not surrender. We obeyed orders. We did our duty." His eyes filled with pain and pride. "But now, our duty is to live." Kenji walked forward and placed his rifle beside the captain's. Tanaka followed. One by one, each soldier laid down his weapon on the sand. They stood there quietly, facing the sea, feeling the wind on their faces. Major Yamamoto stepped forward. He saluted them deeply. "You have served with honor," he said. "Your courage will be remembered. Now, let us go home." The boy who had been watching ran forward and handed Kenji a bottle of water. "Are you really soldiers?" he asked, his eyes wide. Kenji smiled weakly and nodded. "We were," he said softly. "For a very long time. The men ate for the first time in days. The food tasted strange, rich and soft, but it filled their bodies with warmth. The women gave them clean clothes and shoes. Kenji touched the fabric and could hardly believe how soft it was. The world outside the jungle felt like a dream. As night fell, they built a small fire. For the first time in years, the soldiers sat in the open without fear. The stars shone above them, and the sea whispered nearby. Hiroshi looked up at the sky. "I thought the world had forgotten us," he said. But it waited. It was patient, Tanaka nodded. "We were soldiers," he said. "Now we must learn to be men again." Kenji listened to the soft sound of laughter coming from the people near the boats. He had forgotten what laughter sounded like. It was light and alive. He looked at the water and saw his reflection. He looked older, but in his eyes there was life again. When the fire grew low, Major Yamamoto said, "Tomorrow we will sail to the city. You will see Japan again. It has changed. There are lights, cars, music, but it is still our home." Kenji closed his eyes. He imagined walking through his village, hearing his sister's voice, smelling rice cooking. He smiled through his tears. For the first time, he believed he would see home again. Hiroshi looked at his men sleeping beside the fire. He thought of all the years lost in the jungle, all the days they had fought the shadows of a war that had already ended. He whispered a prayer to the ones who never made it home. Then he looked at the rising moon and said softly, "Tomorrow we return." The jungle behind them was dark and quiet. The waves rolled gently against the shore. The soldiers who never surrendered were finally going home. The next morning was calm and clear. The sea was soft and quiet, shining under the pale sun. The soldiers stood on the beach with their bags packed. They had nothing much, only their old rifles, some clothes, and a few small things they had kept through the years. Captain Hiroshi looked at the ocean for a long time. It was the first time he had seen it without fear of ships or enemies. Now it looked peaceful, endless, and new. Major Yamamoto and his team prepared the small boats. The villagers who had helped waved from the shore. The boy who had drawn a sun in the sand the night before stood beside his mother smiling. The soldiers stepped into the boats slowly, still unsure if they were dreaming. The water felt cold on their feet. Kenji looked back at the jungle one last time. The green trees swayed in the wind. That jungle had been their prison and their home. Now they were leaving it behind forever. As the boats moved away from the island, Kenji could not stop watching it. The sound of the waves mixed with the creak of the wooden boat. Tanaka sat beside him, quiet, his eyes closed. Hiroshi sat in the front, his back straight, his rifle across his knees. The others sat close together, not speaking much. The sea breeze felt strange on their faces, soft and cool after so many years of heavy air in the jungle. After a while, Major Yamamoto spoke. "We will reach the main ship soon," he said. "From there, we will go to Japan. You will meet your families. You will see how much the world has changed." Kenji looked at him, then at the horizon. "Changed?" he asked softly. "How much can a world change in 30 years? The major gave a small smile. "You will see." When they reached the larger ship, sailors helped them climb aboard. The soldiers blinked at the wide deck, the metal walls, the tall antennas. Everything looked new and clean, so different from their old world. They were given clean clothes, white shirts, trousers, and shoes. Kenji touched the fabric and felt shy. He had forgotten what clean clothes felt like. In the ship's small dining room, they were served bowls of rice, fish, and soup. The smell alone made their eyes fill with tears. Kenji took one bite and stopped. It was the taste of home, simple, warm, and real. For a long time, they ate in silence, too full of feeling to speak. Later, Major Yamamoto showed them newspapers, photos, and magazines. The pictures showed tall buildings, cars, people in bright clothes, smiling families, children holding toys. Tanaka stared at them in disbelief. "Is this really Japan?" he asked. "Our Japan?" "Yes," Yamamoto said. "Japan rebuilt itself. There is no war now, only peace." Kenji turned the pages slowly. He saw crowds of people walking under lights. He saw trains and airplanes. He saw faces full of life, not fear. He smiled and whispered, "It looks like a dream." Hiroshi sat apart, looking out at the sea. His face was calm, but his mind was full. He thought of the years in the jungle, the hunger, the storms, the deaths. He thought of the men who had followed him, who had trusted him. He felt both proud and sad. They had done their duty, but at such a great cost. That night, Hiroshi could not sleep. He went to the deck and looked at the stars. The sea stretched far in every direction. The sound of the waves was gentle, almost kind. He thought of the Emperor's voice again, the message of peace. He had obeyed that voice his whole life, first to fight, then to endure, and now, perhaps, to live. Kenji joined him quietly. "Captain," he said, "do you think they will understand us?"
"The people at home?"
Hiroshi looked at him. "We are part of history now," he said softly. "They will listen, but they will not truly know. Only we know what it means to live so long in war after it has ended." Kenji nodded. He felt both old and young, both lost and found. He looked at the waves and whispered, "At least we're going home." The next morning, the ship reached Japan. The harbor was full of people, reporters, soldiers, families holding signs and waving flags. The crowd was larger than the soldiers had imagined. As they stepped off the ship, cameras clicked and people cheered. Some cried openly. Tanaka stopped suddenly and stared. An old woman ran toward him, her hair gray but her face bright with tears. "Mother," he whispered. She threw her arms around him and he held her tightly, shaking. Kenji's sister was there too. She was older, but her smile was the same. She ran to him and hugged him, crying, "I told them you were alive!" Kenji could not speak. His mother came forward slowly, her steps unsure, and touched his face. "You were gone so long," she said. "But you came back." He knelt and took her hands, his heart bursting with love and pain. Hiroshi stood a little apart. A man in a suit came forward and bowed deeply. "Captain Hiroshi," he said, "the government honors you and your men. You are heroes who kept your faith." Hiroshi bowed back, but his voice was quiet. "We only followed orders," he said. "We did what we thought was right." The man nodded with respect. "Still," he said, "the country remembers." Reporters asked questions, flashing cameras in their faces. "How did you survive so long? Did you know the war was over? What kept you going?" Hiroshi answered slowly. "We had duty," he said. "We had each other. When the world was silent, honor was our only sound." Later, they were taken to a small house by the sea to rest. It was quiet and safe. They were given soft beds and hot water to bathe. Kenji sat by the window looking at the waves. The smell of the ocean was the same as on the island, but now it was peaceful. That evening, the 6 remaining soldiers sat together for one last meal. They laughed softly, shared stories, and remembered the ones they had lost. Tanaka raised a cup of tea. "To our brothers," he said. "To those who never gave up, and to those who never came back." They all lifted their cups. Hiroshi looked around the table. He saw men who had once been boys. He saw the weight of years in their faces, but also the light of freedom. He smiled and said, "We were soldiers once. Now we are men who lived." When night came, they sat outside and watched the moon rise. The world was quiet and full of promise. The war was finally far behind them. Kenji closed his eyes and listened to the waves. He thought of the jungle, the silence, the fear, and how it had all led here, to peace. For the first time in many years, he felt no need to look over his shoulder. He whispered, "We are home." Hiroshi looked up at the stars, his hands folded. "The war is over," he said softly, "and so are we." The wind carried his words out to sea, gentle and free. The soldiers who never surrendered had finally found their peace. The days passed quietly after the soldiers returned home. The noise of the city was strange to them. Cars moved fast, lights flashed at night, and people carried small machines that played music. The world had become something new. Captain Hiroshi and his men walked through the streets like strangers from another time. Everywhere they went, people looked at them with respect, sadness, and wonder. Kenji found it hard to sleep in a real bed. The softness felt strange after so many years on the ground. At night, he sometimes dreamed of the jungle, of rain, fireflies, and the sound of footsteps in the dark. He would wake up sweating, his heart racing, before remembering that he was home. His sister stayed by him and made sure he ate and rested. She said softly, "You don't have to be a soldier anymore." But Kenji didn't know how to stop being one. Tanaka spent his time visiting his mother's small house. She was old now, her hands thin, but her eyes full of pride. She kept the photo he had sent before the war on the table. When he came home, she cried and laughed at the same time. "My boy," she said, "I thought you became a spirit long ago." He held her hand and said, "I almost did. The government gave the soldiers medals and honors." There was a big ceremony in Tokyo. Reporters, photographers, and crowds filled the hall. The Prime Minister gave a speech about bravery, loyalty, and faith. When it was Captain Hiroshi's turn to speak, he stood quietly for a moment before saying, "We did what we thought was right. We fought because we believed our country needed us. We never meant to live apart from the world for so long, but now we must learn peace as we once learned war." The room was silent. Then people began to clap, slowly at first, then louder and louder. After the ceremony, Hiroshi visited the graves of his fallen soldiers. Rows of white stones stretched across the green hill. He knelt and placed flowers on them. "You did not surrender," he whispered. "You did your duty until the end. We lived for you." His voice broke, but his face stayed calm. He felt both heavy and light, as if the ghosts of the jungle were finally letting go. Kenji started to help in his sister's rice field. His hands, though rough from war, learned again how to touch the earth gently. The smell of wet soil and the sound of water between the plants reminded him of childhood. Sometimes neighbors came to see him. They asked him about the island, about how he survived. He told them simple things, how they built shelters, how they hunted, how they believed the war still went on. But he did not tell them everything. Some memories were too deep, too painful. One afternoon, a group of school children came to visit him. Their teacher said they were learning about the war. The children looked at him with wide eyes. One small boy asked, "Why didn't you come home sooner?" Kenji smiled softly and said, "Because we thought the world still needed us." Another girl asked, "Were you scared?" He nodded. "Every day," he said. "But courage is not the lack of fear. It is doing your duty even when you are afraid." The children bowed to him before leaving, and Kenji felt something warm in his heart. Hiroshi lived in a quiet house near the sea. He often sat by the window and watched the waves. He still woke early, still cleaned his shoes, still folded his clothes neatly. The habits of a soldier never left him. Sometimes he received letters from people who had read about him. They thanked him for his service, for his example of loyalty. He always wrote back simply, "Serve your country with wisdom, not only with obedience." One evening, Kenji visited him. They sat together drinking tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "Captain," Kenji said, "do you ever wish we had left the jungle sooner?" Hiroshi thought for a moment. "Every man's life is made of choices," he said. "We chose to stay because we believed we were right. If we had left, we would not have peace now. We would only have doubt. So no, I do not wish it different." Kenji nodded. "Sometimes I miss it," he said quietly. "Not the fear, but the silence." "The world now is so loud," Hiroshi smiled. "Yes, the jungle had a kind of truth in it. But life moves forward. The silence is part of us now. We carry it wherever we go." A few years later, Tanaka passed away peacefully in his sleep. The others attended his funeral. People from the village came to pay their respects. Hiroshi stood by the grave and saluted. "A soldier till the end," he said. Kenji placed a small piece of bamboo beside the grave, a symbol of strength and endurance. Time moved on. The story of the soldiers who never surrendered became famous across Japan. Books were written, films were made, and people came to visit the island where they had lived for so long. Some called them heroes, others called them lost men. But to Hiroshi and Kenji, they were simply soldiers who did their duty until the end. One summer evening, Kenji walked along the beach near his village. The sound of the waves was soft, the same as it had been on that faraway island. He bent down, picked up a seashell, and held it to his ear. It sounded like the jungle, full of life, full of memory. He smiled and whispered, "We made it." In his small house, Hiroshi grew older. His hair turned white, his steps slow. He still stood to salute the rising sun every morning. One day, as he watched the light spread across the sea, he closed his eyes and smiled. The wind moved through the window and carried his breath away. When they found him, he looked peaceful, like a man finally home. At his funeral, Kenji stood before the crowd and said, "Captain Hiroshi taught us that duty gives life meaning, but peace gives it purpose. We followed him through darkness, and now we walk in light." After the ceremony, Kenji walked to the sea again. He looked out at the endless horizon, where the sun met the water. The air was quiet. He thought of all those who had never made it home, of all the years lost, and of all the peace they had finally found. He whispered, "Rest, Captain. You kept your promise." Then he turned and walked back toward his village, his steps slow but sure. The sound of children playing reached his ears. It was a sound he never heard in the jungle. It was the sound of life continuing. And for the first time, he knew that the soldiers who never surrendered had truly returned, not just to their homeland, but to the world of the living. The waves rolled gently on the shore, washing away the footprints behind him. The sky grew golden, and the sea shone like glass. Peace had finally come, not just to their hearts, but to the world they once fought for. Years passed, and the world changed even more. Cities grew taller, machines became faster, and people no longer spoke much about the war. The soldiers who never surrendered became part of history. Their names were in school books, and their pictures were shown in museums. But for Kenji, the memories were still alive. He carried them quietly like old scars that never truly healed. Kenji was now an old man. His hair was gray, his back bent, but his eyes still sharp and gentle. He lived in a small house by the sea, near the same waves that had welcomed him home many years ago. Every morning he walked along the beach with a wooden stick, looking at the horizon as if waiting for something. Sometimes he picked up shells, sometimes pieces of driftwood. He would whisper to himself, "Still here, still standing." The villagers knew him well. They called him Grandfather Kenji. Children often ran to him asking for stories. He always smiled and said, "Stories are heavy. Are you sure your hearts can carry them?" The children would laugh and say yes, and then he would tell them simple tales about friendship, about courage, about the jungle that had no end. He never told them about fear, hunger, or death. He wanted them to hear hope, not pain. At night, Kenji sat by the window and looked at the stars. The same stars that had watched over him in the jungle now watched over his quiet home. Sometimes he felt he could still hear Captain Hiroshi's calm voice saying, "Stay strong. Do your duty." Those words had guided him through his whole life. He would smile and whisper back, "I am, Captain. I still am." One day a young journalist came to see him. The man bowed deeply and said, "Sir, I am writing a book about you and your brothers. The new generation wants to understand. Will you tell me your story?" Kenji looked at the young man for a long moment. "Our story is not only about war," he said slowly. "It is about believing in something so strongly that you forget how to stop. We fought because we thought it was right. We stayed because we were afraid to be wrong." The journalist listened carefully, writing every word. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. Kenji thought for a long time. "Regret?" he said at last. "Sometimes, yes. We lost so much. But we also learned what peace really means. Only those who lived without it can understand its worth." The young man bowed again. "Thank you," he said. "Your story will help many." Kenji nodded. "Then it is worth telling." After the journalist left, Kenji went for his usual walk. The air smelled of salt and rain. The sound of waves brought him peace. He saw the children playing on the beach, building castles in the sand. He smiled. That was the world he had dreamed of. A world where children could laugh without fear of guns or hunger. He whispered to himself, "Captain, we did it." The war truly ended. That evening, he took out an old box from under his bed. Inside were the few things he had kept all his life: a torn piece of his soldier's uniform, the photo of his sister and mother, a rusty dog tag, and a small piece of paper with Hiroshi's handwriting. It said, "Honor is not in fighting. It is in protecting life." Kenji read the words again and again until his eyes blurred with tears. He sat down by the window, watching the sky turn orange. The sea was calm, and the sound of the waves was soft. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the dog tag and held it tight. "So many years," he whispered. "So many faces gone." That night he dreamed of the island. The jungle was green again, bright and alive. He saw Captain Hiroshi standing under the trees, young and strong, smiling at him. The other soldiers were there too, Tanaka, Mori, and the rest, all dressed in clean uniforms, waiting. The captain raised his hand in salute. "It's time to rest, Kenji," he said. "You did well." Kenji smiled in the dream and saluted back. "Yes, Captain," he said softly. "I'm coming." The sound of birds filled the air, and the sunlight touched his face. It felt warm, peaceful, endless. The next morning, the villagers found Kenji sitting by the window, his eyes closed, his face calm. The box lay open beside him, the dog tag resting on his chest. He had passed away quietly, like a wave fading into the sea. The news spread quickly. People came from far and near to pay respect. Reporters wrote stories about him, calling him the last soldier who never surrendered. At his funeral, children carried flowers and the school band played softly. The villagers placed his photo beside Captain Hiroshi's in the town's small memorial hall. An old man who had known Kenji spoke to the crowd. "He lived through war and found peace," he said. "He showed us that courage is not just fighting, it is surviving, forgiving, and living again." The crowd bowed their heads in silence. After the ceremony, the children went to the beach and drew a big sun in the sand, just like the boy on the island had done long ago. The waves slowly washed over it, but for a moment, it shone bright and red. Years later, people still came to that beach to leave flowers and shells. They said the sea there was special, always calm, always kind. Some said if you listened closely to the wind, you could hear a soft voice whisper, "We are home." And maybe it was true. Because in that wind lived the memory of men who fought, who endured, who never gave up even when the world forgot them. The soldiers who never surrendered had finally found eternal peace, not in victory or defeat, but in the quiet promise that their story would be remembered. The sea kept moving, the waves kept singing, and the world kept living. The sun rose and set, the same as it always had. Life went on, simple and full of hope, just as Kenji and his brothers had once dreamed it would. Many years passed after Kenji's death. The story of the soldiers who never surrendered became part of Japan's heart. Every year, on the day they were found on the island, people gathered by the sea to remember them. The village children carried flags with red suns, and the elders told the story again and again. The story of the men who waited, who fought shadows, who believed until the very end. Time moved on. The world grew faster and louder, but the memory of those soldiers stayed gentle and quiet, like the sound of waves against the sand. In the village where Kenji had lived, the house by the sea still stood. The walls were old, the wood faded, but the windows still looked out toward the horizon. Sometimes fishermen said they saw a figure there at sunset, a man with a calm face, watching the ocean as if waiting for his brothers to return. One summer morning, a young woman named Aiko came to the village. She was a student from the city studying history. She had read about the soldiers who never surrendered and wanted to see the place where Kenji had lived. She walked through the quiet streets, past the fields and the children playing. Everyone greeted her kindly. They were used to visitors who came to learn about the past. Aiko reached the small memorial by the sea. It was simple. A stone with names carved on it, surrounded by flowers and seashells. The names were faded but still clear. Captain Hiroshi, Sergeant Tanaka, Private Kenji, and the others. She placed a small white flower on the stone and whispered, "Thank you." An old fisherman sitting nearby saw her and smiled. "You've come to see the heroes," he said. "I knew Kenji. He used to tell stories to my grandchildren." He was quiet, but his eyes were full of peace. Aiko sat beside him. "Do you think they were happy in the end?" she asked. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "They came home, and that was enough. They found what they had lost, not the war, but themselves." Aiko looked at the sea. The sunlight danced on the waves. She imagined the soldiers stepping out of the jungle, thin and tired, seeing the ocean for the first time in years. She could almost hear their voices, feel their relief. She smiled and said softly, "They must have been very brave." Later that evening, she walked along the beach. The wind was soft, carrying the smell of salt and flowers. She found a small piece of bamboo washed up on the sand. Its surface was smooth, but she could see faint letters carved into it. She bent closer. The letters formed a word, honor. She held it carefully in her hands, as if it were something alive. As the sun began to set, the sky turned golden and red. The waves caught the light and glowed. Aiko stood there, feeling as if the past and present were touching in that moment. She thought about how those soldiers had spent decades believing they were alone, only to find that the world had waited for them all along. Back in the village, the people prepared for the annual Remembrance Night. Lanterns were hung along the beach. Families brought food, tea, and small candles. Children drew suns in the sand, just like the boy had done long ago. When darkness came, they lit the lanterns and sent them floating on the water. The lights drifted gently, moving out to sea like tiny stars. The old fisherman stood with the children. He raised his hand and said, "Let these lights be our message to them, to the ones who waited, the ones who endured. May they see our peace and know their duty is done." Aiko watched the lights and felt tears in her eyes. She thought of Captain Hiroshi still saluting the rising sun in his last days. She thought of Tanaka, strong and loyal until his final breath. She thought of Kenji sitting by the window, whispering to the sea. They were all gone, yet somehow they were still here, in the air, in the water, in every sunrise and wave. She took out her notebook and wrote, "They never surrendered to war, to fear, or to time. They surrendered only to peace." That night, the village grew quiet. The sea was calm, the stars clear. The lanterns had drifted far out, but one still shone close to the shore. Aiko walked to it, knelt down, and touched the water. The flame flickered gently, and for a moment she thought she saw a reflection beside her. A line of men standing in the surf, wearing old uniforms, their faces peaceful. Captain Hiroshi at the front, Tanaka beside him, and Kenji smiling softly. She blinked, and they were gone. But the warmth in her heart stayed. She whispered, "Rest well. You are home." The next morning, Aiko returned to the city. She carried the bamboo piece in her bag. Months later, she finished her book, The Soldiers Who Never Surrendered, a story of faith and peace. It became a book that touched many hearts. People around the world read about the soldiers and their long years in the jungle. They cried, they admired, and they learned that peace is not given. It is earned. Years passed again. The world kept changing, but the story never faded. Teachers still told it to students. Artists painted it. Musicians wrote songs about it. And in that small village by the sea, the memorial still stood, surrounded by flowers. Every time the sun rose over the water, the light touched the stone and made the names shine. Sometimes, travelers said they felt a strange calm when they stood there, as if unseen hands rested gently on their shoulders. Some said that when the wind was right, they could hear voices whispering in Japanese, soft, steady, proud. The village children grew up hearing those whispers. They played by the water and pretended to be explorers, not soldiers. When their parents asked what they wanted to be, they said, "Not fighters, builders." The story had taught them that real strength was not in holding a gun, but in holding hope. Many decades later, when the world had changed beyond recognition, the sea still touched the same shore and the same sun still rose. A new child, walking with his grandmother, stopped by the stone memorial and read the names. "Who were they?" he asked. The grandmother smiled gently. "They were men who believed," she said. "Men who waited for peace when the world was full of war. They showed us how to never give up, not in battle but in faith." The boy nodded slowly. "Will they ever come back?" he asked. His grandmother looked at the horizon. "They never left," she said. "They are in the wind, in the waves, in every sunrise we see." The boy smiled and ran toward the water, leaving small footprints on the sand. The tide came in and washed them away, but the sea, endless and bright, carried their story on forever. And so, the soldiers who never surrendered lived on, not as ghosts, but as reminders of what it means to endure, to believe, and finally, to find peace. The waves kept rolling. The sky stayed wide and the world moved forward. But in the quiet rhythm of the sea, their spirits still marched, steady, proud, and free. Many years later, their war finally ended. not with guns or victory, but with peace. The soldiers who never surrendered returned home as old men, carrying stories of honor and survival. Their lives became a lesson for the world, that true strength is not in fighting, but in believing, in enduring, and in finding peace after pain. Even now, when the waves touch the shore and the sun rises over the sea, their spirit lives on, silent, proud, and free. They were soldiers once, but they became symbols forever,